me just name this then. Let me just be very clear about this up front. The story of Sodom, I read yesterday from chapter 18, the kind of the preliminary leading up to this, where God tells Abraham he's going to destroy the town of Sodom because their cruelty has reached his ears. God has heard about it. And nowhere in that passage is there a conversation about what form the cruelty is taking. And so what scholars will tell you is that the issue here is about hospitality, about being kind to strangers, essentially, is what it boils down to. There's also a passage in chapter 13 of Genesis that refers to Sodom in a similar way. The outcry against these people has risen to the heavens, or whatever it says. There's a quick reference. It's much shorter than what happens in chapter 18. But again, even there, what's discussed is not some form of sexual misappropriation, right? They're cruel, okay? What I'm about to read is a story about the cruelty of the people of Sodom. And their cruelty is that there's someone visiting and they don't want visitors for various reasons. And you can read lots of articles that talk about that. We have seen both Abraham and Lot be very generous and gracious with visitors prior to this chapter. And that is essentially the standard for this group of people who will be called the Israelites in a few generations. What happens here, as elsewhere in Scripture, I talked about it in terms of the story of Babel in chapter 11 in my other series, Does the Bible Tell You So? People are taught to go into the story with a certain set of presuppositions about what the story is about, and then they see that. When it comes to the story of Babel, people are told that the problem here is that humans are arrogant and want to be like gods or something. And so they read through that lens and they see some things in the story that the story doesn't actually uphold. People have been taught that what's happening here is that the sinfulness or the wickedness of the men of Sodom is that they are gay men, and people are told that this is an abomination to God, and this is the proof. God wants to destroy the whole city because the city is full of gay men. That is the story that people are told, and so they read this story through that lens, and that lens can be reaffirmed if that's how you're reading it. But that is a form of a lens that the story itself does not give support to. That is entirely a lens you are bringing to it. So when you're talking about Genesis 19, I would like you all to hear up front from me. I can walk people through showing them this isn't about a form of sexuality, right? This is about cruelty. And I can show you, look, they want to rape these people. This is about cruelty. I can walk people through that. And because they have years and years, maybe only 19 years because they're 19 years old, and maybe 60 years or whatever, because of years of being trained to see it, and given how deeply impersonal and important sexuality happens to be to people, it is very difficult to hear a different interpretation of this story. It is hard to hear a different interpretation of any story in Scripture if you have grown up attached to Scriptures. If you've grown up attached to the Bible and someone shows you a different way of reading the Garden of Eden story, it might be freeing for you. It might also be way too challenging and threatening to your belief system to hear it. I understand why people are trained and kind of programmed and pre-guided to see this as being about homosexuality, but that does not mean that that is an honest rendering of what they were talking about here in the story, or of almost all, but not all, but almost all other references to Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible itself. There is one reference in one of the latest writings in the Newer Testament that connects Sodom to a harmful engagement with sex in the writing. But Jesus himself talks about Sodom and Gomorrah as cruel people. And I ask people who are students of mine, when I ask them to look for points in the story that help you to see this isn't about God judging men who are gay. That is not what the story is about. The story is about God disliking cruelty. And part of the problem here in our current conversations and in the United States context, I hear it in political context as well as in religious context, that people mesh. They talk about homosexuality as if homosexuality is in itself a bad thing. Therefore, of course, that is the cruelty. Okay, that's what happens in some of the conversations. And where that comes from is just a lack of understanding of human sexuality. And so it becomes a cycle that feeds itself. People's fear about something different fueled a misreading of the story to begin with, and we could just whatever. And so it becomes a cycle that perpetuates itself.